Want to sharpen your aim, save money on ammo, and train like the pros, all from the comfort of your home? Meet Mantis X, the cutting-edge dry-fire training system used by the Marine Corps, Army, and Special Forces to build precision and confidence. 94% of shooters report improved accuracy in just 20 minutes, and you could be next. With Mantis X, you train with your own firearm, anytime, anywhere, without wasting a single round. In less than 2 weeks, the system pays for itself in ammo savings alone. As a proud gun owner, I believe in the Second Amendment, but rights come with responsibility. That means refining your accuracy, mastering your skills, and staying prepared every time you train. Whether you're a new shooter or an experienced marksman, Mantis X helps you train smarter, shoot better, and defend what matters most. Get yours today at mantisx.com. That's mantisx.com.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Archaeology Show. TAS goes behind the headlines to bring you the real stories about archaeology and the history around us. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeology Show, episode 306.
Today we have a timelines episode for the time frame of 1100 to 1600 CE, where we look at Rapa Nui, the Mississippians, and Great Zimbabwe.
Let's dig a little deeper and find out what else the Mississippians did for us. Welcome to the Archaeology Show, everybody.
Hello. You did that differently than normal because it's been so long since we recorded.
Yes, I did.
Oh, sorry. Apologies,
Don't do
world.
that.
I know. I feel bad because we kept meaning to record, but we're on like a really long driving trip right now. And yeah, excuses, insert here.
Yeah, we thought we would be able to get a little bit ahead, but
yeah,
we had a lot with a whole trip back to North Carolina for a wedding, and then our trip to Canada has started, which has been great. But
trip to Alaska, actually. We're just in the Canada part of it.
Through Canada, yeah. A lot to see up here, though.
Yeah.
But our normal recording time is taken up by driving right now. So.
Yeah. We usually record on Fridays, or at least we try to. But now Friday's a drive day for us because...
Just for a few weeks.
Yeah, until we get to Alaska. We'll slow down when we get there. We're just trying to get to Alaska so we're there in time for, the small window of good weather that there is up there to do things. So,
Indeed. Yeah, but it is beautiful driving up through British Columbia here. And
oh, my gosh.
Yeah,
gorgeous.
We're about to spend a week in the far north of British Columbia, and then by next weekend, not if you're listening to this years from now, but our time next weekend, we'll be going through the Yukon. And I just got to say, the group that we're with, including Rachel and our two friends, so all the people except me, do not agree with this, but I'm curious as to the listeners right here real quick, as we're talking about archaeology. And archaeology kind of inspires adventure because you go places, you learn about other cultures and things like that. But sure, we're passing through the southwestern corner of the Yukon. And I don't know. I mean, sure, it's like, okay, there's maybe not a lot to see in the Yukon. We are going to go to a couple places.
Yeah, it's just it's a lot of mountains and like beautiful landscapes, but there's not a lot of towns. Not a lot of stuff to do.
We're going to go through Whitehorse.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like the town in the Yukon.
Yeah.
And there's a cool museum there I hope that we're going to be able to at least record from or talk about.
Yeah, we should be able to.
There's a lot of Beringia stuff there and some kind of neat things there. But anyway, the point is, it's going to be kind of neat from an adventurous standpoint to say that we drove our RV through the Yukon, that we've been to the Yukon. Because the Yukon, just that word to me inspires adventure.
It makes me think of like dramatic landscapes with no people. And there's nothing I love more than dramatic landscapes with no people.
I know.
So that part of it I'm really looking forward to.
Like a further northern territory here in Canada is literally called the Northwest Territories.
Yeah.
But like I was saying, I don't know if you heard this because we had lunch yesterday and I was talking to the guy that we're with and you were talking to his wife.
Yeah.
I don't think you heard me say this, but like in, the classic cartoon Rudolph, the guy that his name wasn't Northwest Territories Cornelius. His name was Yukon Cornelius because they picked a word.
You're so stupid. How does your brain work?
They picked a word that inspired adventure.
Inspired like wood chopping, I think. Because he's very much like a miner and like a outdoors pioneer. It's very pioneer, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Northwest Territories Cornelius just like
doesn't roll off the tongue.
Didn't test well with audiences. So,
Oh my gosh, you're so ridiculous. Anyway, all right. Yukon, Chris.
So
Let's get this.
Speaking of travel.
Let's get this podcast going.
Yeah, so we're doing a timelines episode. And for those listeners new to the show, timelines is where we take something that you probably have heard of, and we'll start with that, a culture, a site, something like the Great Wall of China or something like that, right?
We call it our anchor place or anchor culture, anchor
event.
Site.
Something like that.
Archaeological site, whatever.
Yeah, something that we think probably most people have probably heard of.
Yeah.
And then we try to find two other things or cultures or whatever that took place at about the same time that maybe are a little bit lesser known to most people.
Or not even necessarily less known, but just like something you wouldn't have thought was happening at the same time. Because there are some major cultures around the world that seem very separate from each other, and they are separate from each other, but then are strangely linked by time because they happened at the same time.
Right.
So I feel like today is kind of a good example of that, at least with our first two, because they're certainly things that we've talked about before. So,
So we'll spend a little bit less time on this first one, only because of, the fact that it is the anchor, but also because it's something we've covered before.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, because if we're going to talk about Easter Island, otherwise known as Rapa Nui, but also, and we'll link to this, but we discussed this actually kind of at length when we reviewed Moana 2.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, because Moana 2 is loosely based on a lot of the cultures and legends of the Polynesian cultures people, in general. Yeah, so we did discuss Easter Island, Rapa Nui at that time.
Yeah, for sure. But But Rapa Nui is, what is it super well known for, right?
The heads.
The giant heads. And we actually saw one of those when we were at the British Museum. Yeah. So that was kind of another thing.
More of a medium head.
It was definitely one of the smaller ones. But as we'll talk about, there's a wide range of sizes of these things. So they're all over the island, and there's tons of sizes. And we've talked about it multiple times over the last year or so, because they also featured pretty big in the Ancient Apocalypse Americas series that came out end of last year, which, He Who Must Not Be Named does that series, and we don't love him or his work, but there's a part of me that loves the spotlight on these cultures. And there's beautiful footage of the island and of the Rapa Nui heads, or the Moai statues that are all over the island. So, silver linings, I guess, when you have to take your pseudoscience with a little bit of a silver lining there. Anyway.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So, all right, Rapa Nui, where is it? What is it?
Yeah, it's about 2,000 miles off the coast of Chile. And it is is it owned by Chile? I think it is.
It's a territory.
It's a territory, yes. I mean, technically, they have their own culture and things like that.
Yes,
but,
It's a territory, and it was, I guess, the name Easter Island, because, we've always heard it called Easter Island, and the Rapa Nui thing is the local name for it, and it's come back in the last... It's become more well-known that that's what local people call the island, I think, is Rapa Nui, right?
I'm sure Trump is going to try to change that.
Right. Yeah. But the name Easter Island was given by the island's first recorded European visitor, which was Dutch explorer Jacob Roggeveen, who encountered it on Easter Sunday, which was April 5th in 1722.
So obviously we have to get the big thing off the plate right now, which is the huge statues.
The huge statues.
The Moai, they're called.
Yeah.
And the Moai statues are these huge figures carved from stone and that stand all over the landscape.
Yeah.
And sometimes in big rows, sometimes by themselves, but they are basically these huge heads, but they're not just heads. If you take a closer look at them, they have like arms that kind of come down their sides, like belly buttons, sometimes little feet if they're not kind of buried in the things. Although, if you look online, one of my favorite cartoon images, because they don't look like they have feet, is one of the big Moai statues, and then it's like the earth, and then it's Stonehenge on the other side.
Yeah, as feet. As feet, yeah. silly little, what are those, the Far
Side.
Far Side cartoons,
I don't know if Far Side did that, but
it's in that vein.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, the statues are amazing, and some are huge and some are not as big, like the one at the British Museum. But what is very clear is that they are works of art, because they're all different.
Yeah.
And they all have a very distinct point of view and expression of art, right? And I think what we do know about them is that they represent these people's ancestors, their chiefs, and their important people in their community. So, there's so many of them because I think a lot of people held importance in these communities. So, a lot of people or ancestors got some kind of representation as a large stone Moai.
Yeah. So since this is a timeline episode, we should probably talk about the timeline.
Oh, yeah, timeline. When was this happening? Duh.
Yeah, so it's about 1100 to 1680 or so CE, right? So actually, not that long ago.
Not as long ago as, some of the great cultures of the world, but yeah.
And Easter Island, Rapa Nui, let's just call it Rapa Nui from now on, has been featured in many collapse narratives as to why did they collapse? Why did they stop making these Moai? Why did they not continue? Although, like many collapse narratives, they didn't really collapse. There are actually still people there that identify as part of this culture. So yeah, for sure. The collapse idea is something that a lot of archaeologists want to like remove from the narrative, because it's not a collapse so much as it is like disbursement, kind of. And also, like, there's always people who are left behind. Like, they didn't just like up and leave one day and disappear. Like, not usually. That's not how it really happened. So right. And there's also possibly much earlier dates to settlement, or at least visitation of this island as well.
Yeah.
By earlier Polynesian cultures, or something like that. But the big development of the Moai and of the Rapa Nui culture,
the villages, and all that.
That was all during this time frame from 1100 to 1600, almost 1700.
And it begins with the arrival of Polynesian seafarers, and these people, they were navigators. They could go thousands of miles on the open ocean. And the reigning theory, I think, is that they came from the Marquesas Islands to Rapa Nui, but it's completely possible that somebody earlier came and just didn't leave as much of a mark, archaeologically speaking. So we don't know about them. I mean, there's a lot of debate that is going on about how long people have been on these islands. And again, not to bring this up again, but like the Ancient Apocalypse show goes into that a little bit more too. And they have some interesting ideas. Not correct ideas, but again, that those shows exist for a reason, and they're fun.
Yeah, I mean, once people got here and kind of stayed here, this geographic isolation helped them develop their own culture, their own sort of ideas, because you have this separation, and without other cultural influences, you
develop your own thing.
You develop your own branch, so to speak. Yeah. So they have their own language line, I guess. They probably they have a language root for sure, but as they develop their own words for things and their own slang, those become part of the language.
Yeah, and I mean, that's how we end up with the sculptures that are all over the island, and you don't really see those anywhere else, not in the same way anyway. So the other thing they had to do, of course, is survive and thrive on this island, which is very remote. And so they brought with them essential crops like sweet potatoes, taro, and other, Polynesian staple things that you can think of. And then they had to develop these sort of sophisticated agricultural techniques to make it grow, to make it work, basically, on this island. They have rock gardens, they have these water management systems and various things to basically support their society with the food, agriculture items that came with the first people that came here.
Right. The period from 1100 to 1680 that we're talking about here did see the dramatic increase in the scale and number of the Moai being carved and erected around the island. And the most elaborate and largest of these were constructed during this time frame. And it was just, people still aren't exactly sure why this was happening. We've done some reading on this separately, and you've seen different shows and things on this, but it has to do with more than likely competition amongst the different chiefs on the island, and just a display of power. And, because these tall statues and the more elaborate ones you could make, and the more that you could make, would represent a power of a certain chief, right? But also, there's discussions about the spiritual nature of these things, and that they represent ancestors. They represent the past chiefs and past popular figures and important figures. So was it a power struggle? In some cases?
It could have been. It's hard to say. It could have been both of those things too, right? Like, there's this image in my head of like a row of the Moai statues sort of on like a platform almost, looking out over the water. And I can just imagine people going there to like make offerings to their ancestors or to whatever spiritual need they were trying to fulfill. They could go to this place, this beautiful place on the water with the representation of their ancestors. And maybe that was like a spiritual thing that they did. I love that idea. I think that was probably part of it.
Either way, the carving of these things did require a coordinated effort.
For sure.
It was a lot of people involved because a few people could have carved it for sure.
Yeah.
But to get these basically into position, sometimes miles from the quarry, one of the bigger quarries of volcanic rock was called Raraku. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. But anyway, there's different theories as to how they moved them. But one of the prevailing theories is just the rolling logs theory, where you're basically taking a log from the back and moving it to the front, and you're just rolling logs.
Yeah.
But you still need, even once you get it moving, you still need a fair number of people, probably at least a dozen people to keep it rolling along.
And we're not talking about flat land here either. Like this is like at least rolling hills, if not almost more like not quite mountainous terrain, but it's definitely not flat.
And I would imagine, I mean, if I were doing this, I would have people out in front of whatever path we're trying to take, like clearing out rocks, and just like
trying to make it go as smooth as possible. Yeah,
so it's a coordinated effort. And then once it got there, and usually these were along a coastline or something like that, because it really seemed like they wanted to display these almost to people who were arriving to the island.
That's true. Yeah,
right?
like they're
because they were along the edge of the coastlines mostly, and they were erected onto other stone platforms that they would make.
It kind of speaks to the idea that it was a show of power, because if other villages were accessing each other by boat, then maybe like one village was going to the other by water, and then the first thing they see when they arrive is like their giant Moai statues. So that could be a power thing. So the construction and movement and placement of these giant stone heads clearly speaks to a really complex society, right? They had hierarchy, they had people in different, roles and positions and things like that, obviously. But we also have some other things that tell us the same thing. We see a really cool and unique writing system called Rongo Rongo. And
Rongo or Rongoro Rongoro Ongo.
Rongoro Ongo.
That's a really hard word to say.
Yeah, I mean it's Rongo. So my brain wants to break it up into Rongo Rongo.
Rongo.
Honestly, I'm not sure. But anyway, what they had were wooden tablets inscribed with unique glyphs, and to this day it's still undeciphered. So yet another ancient language that we don't know exactly how to read, but if somebody could decipher that, would be a really cool way to maybe get more information about what these people were like, what they were doing day by day, why they built the Moai heads and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, super neat.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And just one last thing here too, their navigation, canoe building, one would almost say shipbuilding.
Yeah.
Later on were also pretty advanced for people like this, right? It was just, they had to know these things in order to be able to navigate around the waters, even just sailing even partially across the horizon, right?
Yeah.
You had to know what you were doing, where you were going, how to navigate the waters, how to get past the breakpoints. Beyond
Moana
the island
style.
Yeah, I mean, really.
You're gonna break into song.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of real though, right?
Yeah, right.
They did a pretty good job with that movie.
I know they did. Both those movies are really good.
We actually talked about it during the movies. They had like cultural teams helping them kind of get some of these details right. Know, and that's why they're good movies, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, these guys were no slouches at this kind of stuff.
Yeah, they were definitely a seafaring people who knew their way around the water for sure.
One thing they didn't do very well was manage their resources, which is one of the theories towards their collapse.
Yes.
Because there's almost no trees left on the island.
Yeah.
And there's it was almost like, could they, because I think I've heard reports, we don't have it in our notes right now, I just have something in my head that the number of people is estimated to be quite high at some point, and then that was just unsustainable.
It dropped, I think I read that in like the 17 or 1800s, it dropped down to like tens of people, like 30, 40, 50, not very many people left that identified as Rapa Nui natives. Yeah. But that number has grown back today, and there's a thriving population on the island now. So yeah, it was probably a resource issue that caused the decline in population. But one of the good things about modern methods, I suppose, is help the population kind of grow back and take back control of their cultural heritage.
Well, other people like to build big things at the same amount of time, at the same time, lived in the Mississippi River valleys of Ohio and those things in the United States at roughly the same time.
Yep.
We'll talk about them next. Back in a minute. Welcome back to the Archaeology Show, episode 306. And we are talking about timelines and things that took place roughly from 1100 to about 1600, give or take CE. But, somewhere around in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we're going to talk about what's called the Mississippian culture. Mm-hmm. And this is in North America, specifically really the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just North America. So.
Yeah, for sure. And the date range for Mississippian is technically 800 to 1600 CE, but we thought it fit in pretty good because it's a little bit earlier than Easter Island, maybe, but also we aren't entirely sure when people got to Rapa Nui. So they might have been there as early as this. So
yeah, it fits. It overlaps.
Yeah, for
Timelines
sure.
Episodes never fully are like exactly at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't. It's never perfect, right? So
yeah, but these guys would have been in like text chats together. Been like, what are you guys doing over there? Yeah, so
maybe with their monumental architecture, they were like sending messages to each other.
Well, they all had a common technological ancestor, according to he who must not be named. So
pretend we didn't talk about that guy because we're not talking about that. Anyway, we're not even going to explain that joke to people who don't get it and be jerks because we don't want you to all go find it. I'm just kidding. Right. It's ancient apocalypse, blah, blah, blah. Anyway.
Oh, you explained it anyway.
I know. I can't do that. That's mean. So, I'm not going to be like that.
All right. So Mississippians, the name for the really broad group of people, which was more than just like one Native American tribe.
Yeah.
But the Mississippians in general are considered one of the most complex and advanced cultures that lived in all of North America.
Yeah.
Before the arrival of Europeans.
Yeah,
I like that little caveat in the notes here. Anyway.
Well,
yeah. And they left behind a massive legacy of monumental architecture that you can go see today if you travel around this country.
We've been to many of the sites at this point, and they are all unique and interesting and really worth a visit for sure.
I will admit, as we're going to talk about some of this, that you kind of have to want to see the monumentalness of some of this because they are just kind of big dirt mounds. And we'll talk about that. But when you really kind of dive into the ability and complexity of what it would have taken to create some of these things, they really do kind of stand out.
Well, and you have to imagine those dirt mounds were almost platforms for the structures that they would have built on top and around them too, Yeah,
and the only reason why they might not seem to the average tourist, and I'm not using that disparagingly, but the average tourist is because we're so used to seeing things like pyramids.
Yeah.
We're so used to seeing things like these big carved stone structures. And you're like, this is literally a pile of dirt with grass on it.
But that's why I like talking about this kind of stuff, because I think it's really important to remind ourselves that resources are different everywhere. And the thing that people in, like South and mid United States had a lot of is dirt and wood. Mm-hmm. And the dirt would stay behind, but the wood is gone. So, not a lot of stone, though. They're definitely not building a lot of stuff out of stone, not like they do in the Southwest, not like in Egypt or in other places around the world. So because of that, they're using the resource they have, and maybe it doesn't leave behind as big of a footprint or as spectacular of a footprint. But it doesn't mean that the culture itself wasn't spectacular and amazing. So that's why we're talking about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the Mississippian cultures that did emerge, they didn't emerge from nothing. Yeah. They had easily 12, 13, 14, some would argue much more thousands of years of culture before them.
Yeah.
But what preceded Mississippian in this area, what was called woodland cultures. Mm-hmm. They already had established agricultural practices, some mound building traditions. Mm-hmm. And over time, these became distinctive Mississippian society in these areas. And we're really talking about the Mississippi River Valley and almost more specifically like Ohio and South.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we've seen some of the mounds in Ohio. Cahokia, of course, is the big example of one of them in the St. Louis area, right? And then there's more mounds south of that. And so there's tons in that whole area.
Right. Yeah. Yep. There was an increased reliance on maize agriculture here, and maize is basically corn. So it's a version of corn, so to speak.
Yep.
And new varieties were adapted to the region along with improved farming techniques, which led to increased food production and a lot more people, really. Yeah.
More food means more people, right?
Like more people means more food.
Well, I guess which comes first, chicken or the egg, I suppose.
Right.
But the benefit of this surplus of food is that they could support a larger population, which could then build things, right?
Yeah.
And when you have a big population that can build things, well, you get monumental architecture.
It is an interesting question, though, right? Like you become more sedentary, you get better at farming, you happen on some combinations of farming and agriculture that just produce certain things that grow better, grow bigger, grow faster. Mm-hmm. And it's all of a sudden like well, are you having more babies because you're being more successful at these things? Or are you allowed to have more babies because you're being more successful at these things?
Yeah, it's an interesting question when you start thinking about it. Yeah, I'm not really sure which one is right. It's a combination of both, right? It always is a combination of both things. It's never black and white. Yeah,
they also, along the way, because probably they had more time to just sit and chill. And, you know, when you have more people and when you have bigger societies, you go from like these bands and tribes and you get up to like these chiefdoms and these more city-state type things. You have people that don't have to farm anymore.
Yeah.
And you have people that can specialize.
Yeah.
And so these guys started getting better and bigger, improved pottery making techniques, which allowed for better food storage, cooking. And also they had bigger and more elaborate construction techniques. And they were just able to focus on things that it was less about survival for some people and more about, hey, well, I've got more time to think, because they still have human brains.
It's not about just surviving. It's about human expression. Yeah. You get more art too. You see the expression of art, and probably clothing as well. You get more specialized techniques in the way that they're making clothing, and maybe there's one person in the village who's like really good at making a certain item of clothing, and that becomes their specialty over time, you know? So that is how these civilizations grow and develop and become more complex. It's really so fascinating when you start thinking about it. I don't know why everybody isn't super fascinated by like the growth of different cultures and people over time, but yeah.
And of course, what comes with more food, more people, and more big things and all these ideas? Politicians.
Yes.
So
of course,
along with all of this, it's almost inevitable in society. It's happened in every single society around the planet that has gotten to certain sizes that leaders emerge.
Yeah.
And people that just emerge to organize other people.
Yeah.
And that's their job.
Somebody's got to do it when you have that many people. And other people are meant to be, you know, shepherded. And that's totally fine too. And that's just how societies grow.
Yeah. And we'll come back to that in a little bit. But one of the other key defining characteristics of the Mississippian culture that we're talking about right now is, of course, mound building.
Yeah.
So they built these earthen mounds, including what we call platform mounds, which are basically big cones with flat tops. Burial mounds, which were stratified burial mounds. Not a lot of them have been cut into, but early farmers, European farmers, actually did kind of cut into them and destroy them.
Yeah.
And some of them...
They were in the middle of their fields. They were like, what is this thing? Get it out of the way.
Yeah, they thought they were hills, probably. But it turns out they were burial mounds. And a lot of them were stratified with like layers of burials.
Yeah.
They weren't just like one person.
Super cool.
Yeah, so they built on them through time. I don't think it was like mass casualty situation.
No.
But almost like a little cemetery. So, but the monumental mound building, where they constructed these huge earthen mounds, or almost like temple earthen mounds, like there's Serpent Mound, where it's literally shaped like a snake that's like eating a sun.
So cool. That's definitely my favorite one. Yeah. It's so unique and interesting.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
There's Cahokia, which is like basically a city.
They're just giant
built
mounds.
On mounds, built with mounds.
Yeah, just giant mounds.
Yeah. So.
And again, they're just piles of dirt right now. But you have to imagine, and if you go to the visitor centers, you'll see it. But you have to imagine that there's all kinds of wooden structures on top of and around these mounds.
Yeah.
So they were an anchor point for a much larger city, and that's why they did it.
Yeah. And so not only the labor, but the organization, like we talked about with Rapa Nui, to build these things. I mean, there are people, in fact, I went to grad school with one person who was talking about, oh my God, the name is escaping me, but there's a big mound down in Alabama, I want to say.
Moundville?
Spherical in shape, half semicircle in shape. God, I can't think of the name of it right now. Anyway, he actually did a big study down there. One of the people I went to grad school with, he was a little ahead of me. In fact, he was in a PhD program, and he did a study where they were literally talking about like how many, like kind of not really buckets, but like a basket full of dirt would it take to move? How many basketfuls of dirt
would it take to
construct the mound?
Right.
And because they can kind of see where the dirt came from, because they didn't go far with it.
Yeah.
How many basketfuls of dirt would it take to move this mound? And then how many person days is that? If you're talking about an average number of, you know, maybe baskets per person per hour per day, you know, how do you even figure that out?
That's such a cool, like,
well, and there's so many variables too, because
so interesting.
Like how many hours did they work in a day?
Yeah. And also, okay, listen, we have personal experience with lugging buckets of dirt around.
It's very personal for archaeologists.
It is very personal. I have carried a lot of buckets of dirt, and I'll tell you what, those orange Home Depot buckets, if I'm going to work all day long carrying loads of dirt around, I cannot do those buckets more than maybe 2/3 full. If I'm trying to get a full day of work in. If I go more than 2/3 full, I'm not going to. You maybe can go for a full bucket. I cannot.
Probably way bigger than the baskets they were
Probably,
using.
Probably. True. But it is something to think about, though. Like a smaller person is going to be unable to carry as much as a larger person. So, yeah.
Yep.
Anyway.
And they didn't have labor laws back then. So.
Well, maybe they just had big old muscles because they had to carry them.
But, they're politically organized. And maybe they did have some labor regulations. Not that we would notice it today, but maybe people are like, are you kidding me? I'm not going to do this for sun up to sundown.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So it leads into our next point, though, is that there is a hierarchical social structure here. There's elites, there's commoners. Elites are not out there doing the basket hauling.
Probably not.
And the commoners were, and the people who either had no option but to have that job, or they chose that job for whatever reason. Maybe it was a great job to have, and they had, full meals every day, blah, blah, blah. But you see this social stratification in the archaeological record based on the burials and the goods that you find with people, the housing, bigger and better with the elites, smaller and, not as elaborate with the common people. So, yeah.
So the sort of one of the largest political organizations that we define as archaeologists, aside from the city-state, which is the largest one, is chiefdoms. And that's what most of these Mississippian cultures were organized into. And these had powerful chiefs ruling over large territories of area. So, and that's what, again, most of these were organized into. And they had control over people, over resources, centralized authority, and they had, these people ruled.
Yeah, they were, think of a king. Basically. Like you would in medieval culture. It's the same thing, but just in this sort of chiefdom structure instead.
Right.
And there's extensive trade networks associated with these chiefdoms. They were moving goods across huge distances, including marine shell from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, high quality flint, also from up in the northern region, I think, right? Probably from all over, actually, now that I think about it.
A variety of places,
yeah. And what trade networks do is, yes, it's exchanging goods, but also ideas and cultural practices and things like that get exchanged as well. Yeah. So that's yet another mark of a really complex, large, organized society.
Yep. We've already mentioned Cahokia, but we got to talk about it a little bit. But if you want to know more about Cahokia, we actually covered Cahokia specifically in another Timelines episode.
We did. So we did a Timelines North America focused episode, and it was based on the year 1100 in North America. And Cahokia was one of the places that we focused on. So we'll link to that episode in the show notes so you can go get a full segment of Cahokia.
Yeah.
But just really quick, it was the largest and most influential Mississippian center, of course. It's near St. Louis, and it's considered the largest pre-Columbian city north of Mexico.
Yeah. I will just say one thing about this, and I probably said it in the other episode, and I say it every time we even mention the word Cahokia. It is probably still to date, although I might have to say that the Bath Museum or whatever is probably might trump this. The Roman baths in England might trump this now. But
for your favorite,
the visitor center
at
the Cahokia, because it's a national park.
Yeah,
correct. Yeah, the visitor center
or
there,
national monument.
Yeah, was one of the best I'd ever seen because the dioramas that they had were full life size. Yeah, here's what a village we think would probably have looked like, and they had these huts and these people, and I think they had sounds, if I remember right. But anyway, these people, and they were using a mano matate kind of thing. They were weaving baskets, and they were doing different things. And it just, I feel like a lot of time and effort was put into that. Yeah. And I keep saying this, but legit, the last time we were there was probably 15 years ago plus, or if not 20.
No, we really need to make a point of going through there again. We just don't really cross through the middle of the country very often.
Sorry, the middle. We don't really.
It's just because of the routes we take each year. It's not on purpose, but we should make a point of going there again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody give us a reason to go through the middle, and we'll consider it.
Is it Cahokia enough of a reason?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, super cool.
Yeah, so we won't cover Cahokia too much, but it was the the largest, the biggest.
Yeah, Monk's Mound. I wasn't remembering the name of the mound before, but here it is in our notes. It's the largest monumental earthen mound, basically, or the largest one at Cahokia. Yeah. I think it is probably the largest one in the United States.
You can see probably. You can see the arch in St. Louis. The St. Louis Arch from Cahokia. And you can see Cahokia from the arch if you go to the top of the arch.
Yeah. Cool.
So, because Cahokia is actually in East St. Louis, way out there. So, like we mentioned.
Yeah. East St. Louis is in Illinois.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Cahokia, like other Mississippian culture, declined. And that declination is often mentioned in collapse narratives as well.
Yep. That word, everybody loves to say it collapsed.
Yeah, and there were some factors. I mean, when they got really big, they didn't really understand how to handle resource depletion, right? They didn't really understand that. And so there was an element of deforestation. There was elements of soil erosion.
Yeah.
Climate change may have played a role.
Yeah.
But also European arrival probably played a role.
For sure.
Yeah.
So all of that.
There was a decline for sure in these monumental Mississippian societies because, to be quite honest, they're not around anymore.
Well, yeah, and it happened before the Europeans got there too. They were already declining, and it might have had something to do with the Little Ice Age, I think, was going on at that time, which is basically just a bad turn of the weather, essentially. But it lasted for like a century, and so that really had a big impact on the resources that people needed to support such a large and complex society.
Yeah.
And you know what happens when there's not enough resources is like people start fighting.
Yeah.
And so you get this whole like social unrest thing. There could be power struggles. Like resources are really the key thing. And if that is disappearing, I don't know, it just really helps contribute to these declines, basically.
Yeah. And then for societies that were already in basically political and social decline, then Europeans show up with their diseases.
Yes. Yeah. Think smallpox.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, they really didn't stand a chance after that.
Yeah.
I firmly believe that if Europeans had shown up a couple hundred years early in North America, that would have been a very different situation.
Oh, they would have just kicked them the F out, right?
Well, I don't know. Europeans would have been maybe a little bit less organized, even though probably not. But North America would have been more organized because it seemed like a lot of societies, because of this climate change aspect, and it just seems like the 1600s was a transformational time in North America for a number of societies because of the climate change aspect. And it seemed like a lot of societies we've talked about, Chaco Canyon and a lot of other places, even down in Mexico, were in decline at that point.
They were. So they weren't, they didn't have their best foot forward when the Europeans showed up as far as putting up resistance or fighting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they expected to have to fight either. And nobody could have expected the disease. At that time in the world, nobody knew what disease.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, God.
All goes back to Monty Python.
Why does it always come back to Monty Python? But yeah, like I don't think the Europeans or the Native Americans could have predicted smallpox and what it would do to the native cultures. Now, they might have done something to stop it after it started, had they been more careful, but that is a different problem.
Yeah. I mean, the Mississippian culture, they did a lot for that area, though. I mean, they built mounds, they built probably roads, they probably built right for this look Rachel's giving me. We really need to have a video podcast. What do you think I'm doing here? I'm just talking about what Mississippians have given to the Mississippi River Valley areas there. Go ahead. What? But I'm just, aside from that, what do you think they have?
You didn't even say it right.
I'm teeing you up.
I'm not doing it. This is your deal, bro.
I'm not going to do it. Okay, so.
Oh my God.
All right.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, we do encourage anybody living or visiting the United States and going through that area. Some of those states can be seen as kind of Passover states if you're driving through, but don't do that. No, it really, but they really can be because the highways just kind of like zoom through there. But if you see a sign for something,
watch for the brown signs.
Watch for the brown signs.
Never pass a brown sign if you can help it.
Yes, but also do the reading because like at those places because you got to understand what it took to put some of this together.
Yeah,
and that's what makes it impressive.
Yeah,
you know, some of it. Cahokia is visually impressive. Some of the other stuff, it's a little bit hard to see, especially sitting on the ground. They have some like viewing platforms and stuff, but some of it's a little hard to take in. Even like I said, one of the more impressive ones, like Serpent Mound, is really cool, but it's best seen from the air.
It is best seen from the air. It's hard to see it on the ground, really.
They built it for like ritual significance. It meant something to them.
Yeah.
But they really couldn't get a good vantage point of it.
It's like the Nazca lines that we were just talking about too. Like, it's some of the stuff is hard to see from the air, but when there's a really good visitor center or museum built around it, then you can really learn about this. You can really understand it. It's super interesting. So I love a good reconstruction.
Yes.
Like a reconstruction photo or model is just where I live. I love those.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is a really good, well-rounded timelines episode because we've been in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and we've been in basically the middle of the United States. And now we're headed over to Africa.
Yes.
And I love these big cultures in Africa because I feel like they are less talked about, except for Egypt, which everybody knows about.
Well, of course, yeah.
But they are so not discussed and not talked about, and nobody knows anything about them. And I just love it. So we're going to talk about Great Zimbabwe. And these guys really did some awesome, cool things.
Yep.
And we're going to discuss that in the final segment. Welcome back to the Archaeology Show, episode 306. And we are talking about Great Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe.
Wow. Starting off with a mispronunciation. Perfect. I know you did. It's not a hard word to say at all.
I know the word Zimbabwe, but it kind of looks weird. So that's all I'm saying. Anyway, this is super cool. So
Southern Africa, right?
Southern Africa.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to say right now, before we even start, go type in Great Zimbabwe stone structures into Google Images.
Yeah, because I had never heard of them. So I had to do that because I didn't know what I was... I'm like reading all these notes and descriptions of what they are, and I had not heard of them before. So they're definitely worth taking a look at.
The other thing is, as you're going to find out here, is there have been a lot. Our humanity started in Africa.
Yeah.
Right? And we talk about all the advanced cultures in the rest of the world, but there have been so many fascinating advanced civilizations, advanced from a political and cultural standpoint in Africa that have come and gone while Europeans are fumbling around with sticks and mammoths. And Africa's just like, done that, bro.
Yeah.
And we're just like, come check out our stone structures. In the meanwhile, we've sent a bunch of people up to build pyramids. So done that too, 5,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's just like, for whatever reason, Africa just never became the powerhouse that Europe did. And for that matter, China did.
Yeah.
Global powerhouse, I should say.
Right.
That these places are today.
Yeah.
And it's, it's reasons known only to people who think bigger about those things. But it's just floors me today that we look at Africa and we look at these places as just places of chaos. And in some kind of cases they are.
Well, some places are, yeah.
But the glory and the massiveness of these civilizations of the past is just so vast.
Yeah.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, it is. So back to Zimbabwe, though, and we don't have this in our notes, but I have to say it because it's just the coolest thing I found when researching this. Zimbabwe, the word means stone houses.
Oh, literally stone houses.
Yes, literally stone houses in the Shona language. So anyway, that just goes to show you, like, these ancient stone structures are all over Zimbabwe, and they do. The one that we're talking about today it dates to this time frame because we're on a timelines episode. So it kind of looks medieval a little bit when you look at the pictures of it. It sort of looks like a medieval fortress a little bit, It's really interesting to see that on an African landscape. Like looks like, Serengeti around it or whatever, but it's anyway. So I just think that's so cool.
Well, that stands to reason why these guys are known for that. They are located in sub-Saharan Africa, so below the Sahara, basically the south half of Africa.
Yeah.
This was the heart of a powerful kingdom, major trade center, massive amount of political influence in the area for the time that they were around. And that time is basically, they started building these stone structures around the 11th century CE. So that's when they started kind of developing all this.
Yeah.
Which must mean that that's when they really started to have this organization, the number of people, the political structure to be able to organize the people and have the money and the power and influence to actually start kind of building these sorts of things. And they reached their peak between the 13th and 15th centuries.
Yep.
So
right around the same time as like the medieval.
Yeah.
I'm seeing so many connections between the shape of these and the way they look like, what they look like and the way they're using them. And like, they're very similar to these sort of early medieval structures that you see too, with the ring of stone around and all that. So very interesting. But yeah, so the growth of Great Zimbabwe was closely tied to the rise of a powerful kingdom, of course, right?
Yeah.
And it controlled a significant territory, and there's a ton of wealth through, trade routes, resources, all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were strategically located for trade right where they were in that sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly for the trade of gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of resources like that down in Africa still today. And
precious metals,
diamonds, we all heard about blood diamonds, things like that, still mining that kind of thing today.
Yep.
This kingdom controlled access to these gold fields and had this network and connected it with Southern Africa, East African coast, and beyond. And again, they just controlled all this, including ivory and copper, textiles, glass beads, other exotic items.
Yeah.
Again, how did they not maintain that powerful influence is beyond me, because they're still doing it today, but they just don't have the power and influence around the rest of the world, like, say, Saudi Arabia with their, oil and resources like that.
It is interesting how some cultures manage to expand beyond their borders and some remain very contained within their borders, because they were well positioned with resources and everything to expand, but they just didn't. And maybe it was that lack of need. Like they didn't need to go anywhere. No shade on English people, but like resource wise, they kind of needed to hop off the island sometimes to get more things. They have beautiful, wonderful things in England, but not everything. So
they still do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Some of the stone structures you can look up while we're talking about this that we're going to mention, if you're just kind of Googling things right now, are the Great Enclosure, Hill Complex, and the Valley Enclosures. Those are some of the more notable ones.
Yeah, and
Great Zimbabwe.
We'll have at least one or two links down in the show notes too, so you can click on those and it'll take you to see some of these images.
Right. So they built these structures, and this is what's kind of notable about this architecture, without the use of mortar, but they were carefully fitted granite stones. So they carved these things to fit basically perfectly.
Yeah.
And they're heavy enough that they didn't need any sort of binding agent to keep these stones together. Yeah.
Just like some of the Peruvian architecture that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah. Clearly aliens.
No.
So.
Why? Why does the A word always have to come up every episode? And it's always you. You're banned. I'm gonna make a buzzer for you every time you say that word, and I'm gonna just drop it over it in the show.
Rachel is currently seeking a new co-host for the Archaeology Show. Send applications too.
Oh my gosh, you're fired. Anyway. So the Great Enclosure.
Yeah.
That is the largest and most impressive of the stone structures. It's massive. Some of the walls are over 30 feet high and 20 feet thick. I mean,
who
they're
needs
huge.
mortar?
I know. Well, I know you make it thick enough. I guess you really don't. It just sort of uses its own force to stay together.
Yeah.
But it encloses a complex of structures they probably served a bunch of different purposes. It could have been ceremonial, residential, and the one structure that is super interesting to me is this conical tower thing. And I think you see those in a lot of these different enclosures, but it's truly like a cone of stones. Yeah. And according to our notes, the purpose of these conical structures is still unknown.
Yeah.
But I mean, I can only imagine it's like a lookout situation. It's got to be for protection or viewing, right? To see what's going on around you. That's what it looks like just from looking at the pictures anyway.
Yeah, this other one, the Hill Complex, it's located on the steep hill, and it's thought to be one of the oldest parts of this particular site, this stone structure anyway, in the Hill Complex. And it contains a series of enclosures, passages, platforms, and may have served as the royal residence or religious center. Again, kind of thinking about what it could be there.
Yep.
The valley enclosures are located below the hill, comprise a number of smaller complexes that were likely used for a variety of purposes, including housing, workshop, storage. So they weren't just monumental structures for monumental structure's sake, but they used for, basic purposes as well.
Yeah, so, supporting a large, complex society as usual, right?
Yeah. So. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the cultural and social structure of Great Zimbabwe.
Yeah. So, of course, we have giant construction going on, giant buildings.
Yeah.
And so the scale suggests complex social structure, just like with Cahokia, just like all the other places, just like with Rapa Nui. Like,
almost textbook.
It's so crazy, right? Like, this is all at the same time around the world, and they're developing these complex social structures. They're just expressing them in different ways,
Yeah.
In this case, it's these large stone structures. And of course, they would have had a ruling elite. They would have had skilled artisans and a large labor force in order to get all this done. And there's archaeological evidence to support that idea of this social structure being sort of hierarchical, and that you see those differences in the burials and, the way wealth was distributed basically among the burials and in the different structures.
Yeah. Yep. The economy there was based on a number of things, including agriculture, cattle herding, trade. The control of cattle was very important to these people, as it still is, largely today. I saw cattle herding and things among the Maasai in Tanzania and Kenya when I was there. And they were a symbol of wealth and status, not just gold and things like that. Not everybody had gold, but, the number of cattle you had and things like that could be considered a status symbol. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yep. Much like northern British Columbia, as we've seen. There's a lot of cattle up here. Actually, bison. We saw a huge herd of bison.
Yeah, we saw a huge herd of bison.
But
those were
ranching
bison. Yeah. Those were for grinding.
Yeah, those were burger bison.
They were for grinding and for steaks.
Yes. Yeah. Much like I'm sure some of these cattle were.
Right.
Yeah.
So I love the religion and symbolism stuff that was going on in Great Zimbabwe. And they had this thing called the Zimbabwe bird. And it's this really cute, I love cute little things, right? It's a carved bird shape, basically. And they're carved from different materials and different things. So the Zimbabwe birds, specifically at the Hill Complex site, they were carved on the tops of the monoliths at the height of a person. And they're these little birds that are carved on top. They're almost like little lookout birds, the way they're carved on there. So just so cute and so cool. And like, we don't know exactly what they were doing with them, obviously, but it does suggest some kind of connection to maybe worshiping ancestors, some kind of other spiritual belief. We don't know, but some kind of symbolic significance going on there with these birds.
Yeah. So where are they now? Why aren't they, a world superpower?
Right.
Well, some factors that are still debated, of course, because we'll never really know, are debated, which include a decline in the gold trade, possibly, environmental factors such as overgrazing, and perhaps some internal political changes. So it's possible there was just, and this could have been part of the gold trade thing too, but it's possible there was just massive political instability and nobody really emerged for too long. And if that happens for too long, it really can destabilize an entire social structure.
Yeah, and people start leaving, right? And like that's why these societies decline, is because the people start leaving. And it's not that they're collapsing or disappearing or dying or destroyed or whatever. It's just they're like, wow, it sucks to live here. We're going to go somewhere else, Yeah.
Yeah. Despite all that, people that live in Africa, Southern Africa, still see Great Zimbabwe as a powerful symbol of African achievement and ingenuity. So
as well they should.
Yeah, for sure. It's a whole source of national pride for everybody that lives down there. So at least they had a lasting legacy overall.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, that's pretty much it for our Timelines episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. So, yeah, it was good. That was fun. I like how we got completely spread out around the world. We don't always get fully spread out like that when we do these episodes. So that was a good one. Yeah. So, all right. Well, we'll be back next time. I'm not going to say next week, but we'll be back next time, just in case. We're coming back next week. There's been so much news out lately. We've got to have a news episode. There's so many things to talk about. Definitely some stuff we got to cover. Yeah, for sure. So, although I will say I opened my Apple News this morning and I saw a headline that said, paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, a tourist jumped over a fence and damaged two of the terracotta warriors over in Cambodia. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, please don't be American. Please don't be American. Yeah. And I went into there, and it is a sad story. It was somebody with like mental illness, and it was a local actually, or a domestic person anyway. Yeah. But I was like, oh my God, Americans and tourists. But anyway. So yeah, there is a lot in the news, and we do need to do a news episode or a few of them. Yes. So. Yes, we definitely do. Okay. With that, we will see you next time. Bye. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Archaeology Show. Feel free to comment and view the show notes on the website at www.arcpodnet.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at ArcPodNet. Music for this show is called I Wish You Would Look from the band Sea Hero. Again, thanks for listening and have an awesome day. The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.